Today, we are breaking down exactly what Sainz said, why he said it, what the crisis he is describing actually involves, and why his voice specifically carries the weight it does in this conversation. Subscribe to F1 Race Report right now. Before the bombshell itself, we need to spend a moment on why what Carlos Sainz says about the direction of Formula One deserves a different kind of attention. Sainz has competed for Williams in 2026 after his Ferrari exit. He has experience at Red Bull's junior structure, Renault, McLaren, Ferrari, and now Williams. 5 different team environments across the full spectrum of the competitive grid, multiple regulatory frameworks, the perspective of a front-running team with championship expectations, and the perspective of a team rebuilding towards something better. That breadth gives his observations a weight that a driver who has only ever known one environment cannot carry. He is also 30 years old, not a veteran reflecting on a sport he no longer competes in, an active competitor in the middle of a career whose future extends well beyond the current moment. When he identifies a building crisis, he is identifying something he will have to live with for years unless it gets addressed. That personal stake is different from the stake of a driver closer to the end of their career than the beginning. Now, what he actually said. The precision of the language matters enormously. Sainz's statement centered on the financial sustainability of the Formula One grid, specifically the gap between what the 2026 regulations are costing teams to operate competitively and what the commercial framework distributes back in a way that makes that cost sustainable for organizations below the top 3 or 4 in the pecking order. The 2026 power unit regulations are significantly more expensive to develop and operate than anything that preceded them. The cost cap framework that was supposed to level the playing field was designed around previous technical regulations and has not been updated to reflect the actual cost structure of 2026 machinery in a way that protects midfield and smaller teams from a financial squeeze becoming existential rather than merely uncomfortable. What Sainz said directly, without the diplomatic hedging most drivers apply to statements of this sensitivity, is that several teams currently on the Formula One grid are operating under financial conditions not sustainable beyond the next 12 to 18 months, that the conversation about which teams might not survive to 2027 is not hypothetical. It is happening inside the paddock between the people who actually run those teams, and that Formula One and the FIA need to treat this as a crisis it is, rather than the background noise it has been allowed to become. The financial sustainability problem Sainz is describing is not new in the sense that smaller teams have always operated on tighter margins. What is new is the combination of factors making the current situation qualitatively different. The 2026 power unit costs are the first factor. Teams that customer their tower units are paying significantly more for 2026 specification units than they paid for 2025. The cost increase is not incremental. It is substantial. And it comes on top of aerodynamic and structural costs of building a car around new regulations requiring wholesale development program changes already operating under cost cap constraints. The second factor is the commercial distribution structure. Prize money and commercial rights payments are weighted toward historical performance and the largest teams in ways not meaningfully reformed in the current era. A midfield team receives a fraction of what a front-running team receives, in an environment where the costs of competing are now distributed far more equally than the rewards. The third factor is timing. Teams that might otherwise manage financial pressure by attracting new sponsors on strong results are doing so in a 2026 environment defined by regulation chaos, governance failures, and a sport generating headlines about its own problems more than its racing. Selling sponsorship in that environment is harder than in any stable and positively covered season. Sainz understands all 3 factors. His Williams experience has given him a front-row seat to what financial pressure looks like in a team not at the front of the grid, navigating the 2026 cost environment with resources the regulations are compressing faster than the commercial framework is relieving. The cost cap framework needs reviewing, with specific reference to the 2026 power per-unit cost structure. The current cap was not designed for the actual costs of this regulatory era, and applying it without adjustment produces financial outcomes that were not intended and that are not serving the sport's stated objective of closer and more sustainable competition across the full grid. The commercial distribution structure needs to address the gap between midfield and smaller teams receive and what they need to remain viable. This is a conversation Liberty Media and the teams need to have directly and quickly, rather than in the context of the next Concord Agreement negotiation, which is still years away. And the sport needs someone to say what Sainz said this week at a level of institutional authority that produces action rather than acknowledgement, because acknowledgement without action is what the smaller teams have been receiving for 18 months, while the financial pressure builds to the point where one of the sport's most credible active voices felt the need to call it a crisis in public. Sainz dropped that bombshell this week. The question now is whether anyone with the power to act on it is actually listening. Drop your take in the comments. Do you think Formula One's financial sustainability crisis is being taken seriously enough? And which teams do you think are most at risk if the cost structure is not addressed before 2027? Subscribe to F1 Race Report for this conversation every single week. Like the video, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you at the next race.